Welcome back, demigods, monsters, and gods alike, to the Olympus Report. We're more than halfway through Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Let's see what happens next in Percy's story. Here's everything you need to know about Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth. Before we jump into the fourth installment, let's go over some important things that have already happened in the story thus far. Percy Jackson is a demigod, meaning he is half mortal, half god. His father is Poseidon. The great prophecy speaks of a child of the big three either destroying or saving Olympus come age 16. Thalia, daughter of Zeus, joined the Hunters of Artemis, meaning she will never turn 16. We thought this left just Percy, but now a new demigod named Nico D'Angelo has been discovered to be a son of Hades. Nico, blaming Percy for his sister's death, ran away and disappeared. Only Percy, Anabeth, and Grover know who Nico's real parentage is. Grover, a satyr, has been searching for Pan, the lost god of the wild, and claims that while drinking coffee, Pan spoke to him and said the words, "I await you." Luke, a son of Hermes, is working to raise the Titan Lord Kronos from Tartarus and overthrow the gods and Olympus. Okay, now let's see where the fourth installment of Percy's story picks up. Percy is attending orientation for yet another new school, Good High School. Percy's mom's new boyfriend, Paul Blofus, is a teacher at the school and pulled some strings to get Percy in. Sally drops Percy off and asks him to try and not destroy the school, as Percy tends to unintentionally do that sometimes. Before Sally leaves, Percy asks his mom if she told Paul the truth about him yet, and Sally admits not yet. Before Percy goes, Sally teases Percy about an upcoming date Percy has with Anabeth to the movies. Percy denies that it's a date and then leaves. When Percy walks up to the school, he sees a girl with frizzy red hair. The girl he almost slashed with Riptide last year at the Hoover Dam, and the girl that can see through the mist. To hopefully avoid her, Percy sneaks in through the side entrance but runs into some cheerleaders that block his path. Percy instantly gets a bad feeling about them. But before anything can happen, Paul finds him and pulls him away from the cheerleaders. Paul tries to talk to Percy and reassure him, as he thinks Percy's nervous about starting at yet another new school. But while Paul is talking to Percy, Percy notices that the red-headed girl has spotted him. So he takes off for the gym where orientation is being held. But the girl, Rachel Elizabeth Dare, catches up with him, and both are really shocked to see each other. But before they can talk, the two cheerleaders from before start speaking on stage. When Rachel spots the cheerleader, she yelps and tells Percy to run. Percy is hesitant to leave as he doesn't want to let Paul down, but eventually follows Rachel to the band room. When he walks up to Rachel, she asks if he was followed, and Percy says he doesn't think so. Rachel then tells Percy that he will never believe her, and Percy tells her that he most definitely will, and he knows that she can see through the mist. This confuses Rachel, and Percy explains everything to her about demigods, monsters, and Greek gods. Instead of being unbelieving, Rachel is relieved, as this means she's not crazy and has really been seeing all these crazy things her whole life. Then the two cheerleaders from before find them in the band room. Rachel is terrified, and they put Percy into some kind of trance, but thankfully Rachel is able to snap Percy out of it. Percy is then able to see who they really are. Monsters, or more specific, Impusai, a vampire with a snake body. Impusai lure in young men and feast on them. Percy is frozen again, but Rachel throws a snare drum at one, and this gets Percy to spring into action. He is able to kill one, but the other one, named Kelly, is too fast for him. Kelly tells Percy that it's worthless to keep fighting and that he and every one of his friends at camp are doomed and will soon be slaves to the Titan of Time. But before Percy can question her, he hears people coming down the hall. When Kelly opens the door, Percy goes to try and save the mortals, but Kelly suddenly combusts into flames, making Percy look like he just attacked an innocent cheerleader and blew up yet another school. Rachel tells Percy to run, and Percy realizes there's no way he can explain himself, so he decides to flee. He runs right into Anabeth, who is super happy to see him. But then Rachel catches up to Percy and Anabeth's smile immediately disappears. Rachel demands to know more about the Greek god world, but before Percy can explain anything, they hear police sirens. Rachel tells Percy to run, but that he owes her an explanation for later. She then writes her phone number on Percy's arm. Percy then tugs Anabeth along and tries to explain what happened, but Anabeth is more interested in why Percy would tell a mortal girl about them. Percy says he didn't have a choice as Rachel recognized him from last year, and Anabeth is even more shocked that Percy already knew her. Anabeth mentions that Rachel was kinda cute, but Percy says he didn't notice. Anabeth decides that they should talk about this later and get out of there. Percy thinks about what Kelly said about everyone at the camp being in danger, and they both decide to go to camp immediately. Percy and Anabeth take a taxi to Long Island. Anabeth, for some reason, is still angry at Percy. But Percy manages to get some information out of Anabeth and how she had a monster-infested spring in San Francisco. Percy asks if she's heard anything about Luke, but she has not. Annabeth reveals that Mount Tam is still overrun with monsters, which is in San Francisco, where Annabeth now lives with her father. Percy asks about Grover, and Annabeth reveals that he is still at camp. Percy then uses Annabeth's cell phone, even though it's dangerous for demigods because cell phones attract monsters. He gives his mom a call and leaves a voicemail explaining everything that happened at orientation. Percy then stares down at the phone number on his arm that Rachel wrote. He contemplates calling her and explaining things further, but before he can, they arrive at Camp Half-Blood. Percy and Anabeth get out of the taxi and walk the rest of the way up Half-Blood Hill, and Percy can immediately sense that there's an air of tension surrounding the camp. Anabeth tells Percy that she'll let Chiron know that they're there, as Chiron will want to talk to Percy before the hearing. Percy asks what hearing, but Anabeth changes the subject and says she needs to go talk to Clarice. Percy is super confused by this as Clarice is their bully, but Anabeth tells him that her and Clarice have been working on something together. And then she leaves before Percy can ask any more questions. As Percy makes his way through camp, he says hi to some familiar faces. Connor and Travis Stoll from the Hermes cabin, Selena Beauregard, head counselor for Aphrodite. He looks for Grover but can't find him. Percy is in a bad mood and decides to go to the sword arena as practicing always helps calm him down. When Percy enters the arena, he is shocked to see a hellhound sleeping in the middle of the floor. Percy draws his sword riptide and quietly approaches the monster. But when he goes to strike, his sword is blocked by another sword. The man who blocked Percy's strike tells Percy that she's harmless. The guy introduces himself as Quintus. He states that the hellhound is his pet named Mrs. O'Leary. Percy describes Quintus as a middle-aged man with some gray hair. Percy asks what he's doing there. Quintus states that he's helping Chiron out while Mr. D is away. Percy is shocked to hear that Mr. D, the director of the camp, is away and asks where he is. Quintus states that times are extremely busy and Mr. D is out making sure certain people join the right side. Percy then notices some crates off to the side that are labeled with Triple G Ranch. He asks Quintus what these are, but Quintus says they're a surprise for training tomorrow night. Quintus states that Half-Bloods need more challenges nowadays. Back when he was a kid, there were no fancy camps to keep him safe. Percy is shocked to find out that Quintus is a Half-Blood, as most don't survive until adulthood, considering the fact that demigods are attacked by monsters at every turn. Quintus states not everyone dies a horrible death due to some prophecy. Percy asks if Quintus knows about the Great Prophecy, and Quintus says he's heard a bit. But before Percy can ask more, Chiron comes into the arena. Chiron pulls Percy away. Percy states that Quintus is very strange and mysterious, and Chiron agrees but states he is a very skilled swordsman and will be valuable as an instructor. Percy tells Chiron about Kelly and how she suddenly exploded. Chiron explains that more mature Impusai can do that, and it doesn't mean that Kelly is dead. In fact, it really worries Chiron as the she-demons have started to move. Percy also tells him about Rachel and the attack that Kelly said was coming for camp. Chiron says they shall speak more of this, but first Grover will want Percy in attendance. Percy asks what for, and Chiron tells him a formal hearing of the Council of Elders. which is basically a group of really old satyrs that oversees the search for Pan. When Percy arrives at the hearing, Anabeth is there with Clarice and another girl who is crying in Anabeth's arms. Percy catches Anabeth's eye and Anabeth mutters, "Juniper, Grover's girlfriend." Percy is shocked that Grover has a girlfriend but realizes it makes more sense when he realizes Juniper is a dryad. Grover is trying to convince the council that Pan really did speak to him, but the council does not believe him. Grover has been searching for 6 months and has yet to bring back any proof. Grover claims that he just needs more time, but the council is fed up with his claims. The council states that Grover has 1 more week to look for Pan. If he hasn't found at least some proof by then, that Grover will lose his searcher's license and will have to pursue another career. Grover then approaches Percy and Grover is pretty depressed. Clarice states that there is another, quicker way that Grover could search for Pan, but Grover seems terrified by this idea, and Juniper full out refuses to let Grover go along with it. Percy questions what this other way is, and Anabeth tells him that she'll tell him later as they need to get back to their cabins as inspections are about to start. Percy rushes back to his cabin in hopes of doing a last-minute cleanup job, but when he gets there, he realizes he doesn't have to, as his half-brother Tyson is there, and he's already swept the place spotless. Tyson gives Percy a big hug, and thanks to Tyson, they pass inspection. Percy and Tyson spend the afternoon catching up, and they catch up with Anabeth as well, but Percy can tell that Anabeth is distracted as she keeps glancing towards the forest. Percy then thinks about Grover and he feels really bad that Grover could potentially lose his searcher's license. Percy asks Anabeth what this other way is, and Anabeth says it's something that Clarice scouted last year. Tyson then brings up that he's scared of Grover as satyrs make his nose itch, and that pretty much ends all discussion of Grover. That night, Tyson and Percy go to the sword arena where Quintus teaches Percy some new moves. As they're sparring, Percy notices a tattoo of a bird on Quintus's neck and asks him what it's of. Quintus says it's a reminder and then changes the subject. At dinner, Percy notices that the crack Nico created last year is still there. Tyson questions it and Percy reveals the truth about Nico to Tyson. That night, Percy has trouble falling asleep and notices a light in the room. It's coming from the fountain at the back of the cabin that Poseidon gifted to Percy. He walks over to it and throws a drachma in. Percy then sees an image of Nico D'Angelo. He's sitting on a riverbank near a fire, and Percy recognizes it as the underworld. He then notices that Nico is talking to a ghost. Nico claims that he failed. There's no way to bring her back. Nico is searching for a way to bring his sister Bianca back to life. The ghost that Nico is talking to says there is a way, a soul for a soul. Nico states that he's already tried to sacrifice himself, but the ghost says not Nico, someone else. Vengeance. Nico states that this is murder and he wants no part of it. He just wants to talk to his sister as she would help him. The ghost says he can help him and just to trust him, as he's already helped him in the past by leading Nico through a maze. Nico is hesitant but agrees. Percy does not like this ghost as he acts like all the school bullies Percy has dealt with in the past. Before Percy can hear more, the Iris call disconnects. Percy now knows he doesn't need to look for Nico, as Nico is going to come looking for him. Nico wants to sacrifice Percy's soul for vengeance. The next morning, everyone is extremely excited at breakfast. Percy finds out that last night a Draken tried to breach the camp's defense. The Apollo cabin was able to scare it away, but it's still out there and it's mad. Quintus says attacks like this will become more and more frequent with Luke and his monster army out there. Then Chiron brings over a depressed Grover to Percy's table. Grover tells Percy that Chiron's hoping that Percy can convince him. Percy asks about what, and then Anabeth comes over and starts to explain about the Labyrinth. Last year, Clarice went on a top-secret mission to explore the Labyrinth, and Anabeth helped her out a bit. The Labyrinth is a giant maze of passageways that lie just beneath the surface, kind of like a second skin. The Labyrinth is huge and spans the whole world. You could walk in New York and come out in Rome 5 minutes later. However, the labyrinth is extremely dangerous and holds very deadly monsters. Clarice, while exploring the maze, found a missing half-blood that had joined Luke's army, Chris Rodriguez. And when she found him, he had gone completely insane from traveling through the labyrinth. The labyrinth can not only kill you, but it can drive your mind completely nuts. Luke's men have been exploring the labyrinth, so this is why Clarice was sent to check it out. Anabeth explains the labyrinth is an architectural miracle, and the creator, Daedalus, was a genius. Anabeth believes Luke is trying to use the labyrinth to find a way into camp to launch his attack. Percy says that would be impossible if the maze is as confusing and deadly as Anabeth mentioned. Anabeth agrees, but there is a way Luke could navigate the maze. If he had Ariadne's string. Ariadne's string was created by Daedalus as a way to navigate the labyrinth, and it helped Theseus do such that, and Luke has been looking for it. Anabeth isn't sure why, since the closest entrance is in Manhattan and wouldn't help Luke get into camp. Anabeth also thinks this may be the solution to Grover's problem. Anabeth believes that Pan is underground in the labyrinth, as this is why no one has seen him for 1,000 years. Grover is super disbelieving of this, as he says satyrs hate going underground as it's too enclosed and there's no nature down there. But Percy tries to tell Grover that this could be his last chance to find Pan, but Grover is just completely terrified about the idea. Percy then stops by the stables to visit his old friend Blackjack, who he has a feeling he won't be seeing for a while. That night, the whole camp meets up at the sword arena and suits up as if they're going to play Capture the Flag. Percy notices that the crates he noticed the first day in the corner with Triple G Ranch on them are gone. Quintus then announces their tasks, and they will be partnered in teams of 2. There are 6 monsters with silk packages, and in one of the silk pouches is a golden laurel that the first team to find will be the winner. Percy and Anabeth get teamed up, which Percy is super excited about. And Tyson and Grover get teamed up, which neither of them are happy about. When Percy and Anabeth are looking through the woods, Percy brings up the iris message that he saw of Nico last night. Percy explains the ghost he saw and the bad advice he was giving to Nico. Anabeth says spirits always have their own agenda and are jealous of the living. Percy also mentions how the ghost mentions a maze. Anabeth figures that this must be the labyrinth, and now she's convinced that they need to figure out the maze more than ever to find Pan, stop Luke, and rescue Nico. Percy agrees, but wonders who sent the iris message in the first place. Anabeth and Percy then run into Juniper, who is still really upset over how distraught and distracted Grover is. Juniper begs Percy and Anabeth not to let Grover go into the labyrinth, but Percy and Anabeth say this may be his last shot. But before Juniper can answer, they're attacked by a giant scorpion-looking monster. Percy and Anabeth easily come up with a plan to take it down, but before they can, 2 more approach as well. There's absolutely no way they can take on 3. They see a crack in a pile of boulders known as Zeus's fist and slip inside. But instead of entering a cave, they fall down into a corridor. Anabeth is super freaked out and tells Percy to look for an exit. Percy then notices that the crack where they entered is gone. Anabeth says to look for the mark of Daedalus. Anabeth finds the mark, which looks like a triangle, and pushes it, and a ladder then appears. They climb out and exit. When they exit, Tyson and Grover rush to them, looking worried. Chiron explains that they have been gone for hours, even though they were only gone minutes. Anabeth then reveals why she was so scared and what they found. An entrance to the labyrinth, right here in Camp Half-Blood. An entrance for Luke to attack through. That night, Percy has a dream of a boy and a man in a prison. A king enters and tortures the man. The man is revealed to be Daedalus, and the king is angry as Daedalus turned his daughter against him. The king says since Daedalus loves his labyrinth so much, he will now be a prisoner there and work for the king. Daedalus refuses, but the king says if you don't do as I say, I will kill your son. This gets Daedalus to cooperate, and then Percy wakes up. The next morning, Chiron holds a war council and talks about Luke and the entrance to the labyrinth. Anabeth concludes that Luke must be looking for Daedalus's workshop for a way to navigate the maze so he can attack camp. Anabeth believes that Daedalus may still be in the maze, but Quintus says that's impossible as Daedalus lived 3,000 years ago. Chiron states that there are many rumors about Daedalus and that they shouldn't assume anything. They decide they need to enter the labyrinth first and find Daedalus and convince him to help them and not Luke, and also make sure Luke doesn't find Ariadne's string. Chiron declares that they need a quest, and everyone agrees that Anabeth should lead it. Anabeth then goes to the Oracle to receive a quest. While Percy waits for Anabeth, he talks to Juniper, who reveals to Percy that a week ago she saw Quintus go into the labyrinth. Juniper then warns Percy not to trust Quintus. Tired of waiting, Percy decides to head to the big house. When he's there, he hears sobbing. He decides to go check it out, and he sees Clarice and Chris Rodriguez. Chris Rodriguez is talking nonsense and is crying. Clarice is trying to comfort him, but then Clarice catches sight of Percy, so Percy decides to leave before she gets angry at him. As he's leaving, he can't help but think he didn't know that Clarice had a nurturing side. Once Percy leaves, he sees Anabeth has returned from her trip to the Oracle and has indeed been issued a quest by prophecy. You shall delve into the darkness of the endless maze. The dead, the traitor, and the lost one raise. You shall rise or fall by the Ghost King's hand. The child of Athena's final stand. Destroy with a hero's final breath. And that's where Anabeth ends the prophecy. Chiron asks her if there was any more, but Anabeth says she can't remember. Anabeth then asks if Percy, Grover, and Tyson will come with her, and of course they all agree, even Grover. Chiron is nervous about this as 3 is a sacred number and usually only 3 go on a quest. Last year, 5 went on a quest and only 3 came back. Anabeth insists that she needs everyone. Chiron is still worried but finally relents. Afterwards, Quintus finds Percy and warns him just how dangerous the maze can be. He tells Percy that a long time ago he went in and almost never came out. Quintus says that Percy must focus on what truly matters, and only then maybe Percy can figure the labyrinth out. Quintus then gives Percy a dog whistle that will call Mrs. O'Leary to him no matter where he is. Percy takes it reluctantly but swears to never use it. Percy then heads to the Athena cabin to check on Anabeth, and he can see just how worried she is. She's super concerned about bringing 3 people on a quest. Percy assures her that they've faced worse and will be okay. Then Percy asks what the last line of the prophecy was, and Anabeth surprises Percy by blinking back tears and hugging him. Percy assures her that all will be okay, but they are then interrupted by one of Annabeth's half-siblings. Before Percy leaves, he once again asks Anabeth about the prophecy. He says prophecy's last lines usually rhyme. So he asks, does the last line breath possibly rhyme with death? Anabeth tells Percy she'll see him in the morning and ends the conversation. That night in Percy's dream, he sees Luke. Luke is talking to Kronos, and a soldier reports that a spy in Camp Half-Blood has confirmed that their plan is working. Camp Half-Blood has issued a quest. Kronos is pleased to hear this and says when everything is complete, he will lead the attack on Camp Half-Blood. Luke is hesitant about this and says maybe another Titan should do this, but Kronos says that Luke has to do what he says as he's sworn loyalty to him. Luke is once again hesitant but agrees. Then Kelly, the Impusai cheerleader from orientation, walks into the room. Kelly announces that their advance team is ready to march, but before she says more, she senses Percy and lunges. Then Percy wakes up. Percy doesn't understand how Kelly could sense him in the dream as this has never happened before, but Percy decides it doesn't matter as he's heard enough. Luke's army is ready to attack camp and Kronos is gonna lead it. Percy wants to tell Anabeth, but before he can, he sees the fountain in the back is once again glowing. He asks the fountain to show him Nico, and it does. He sees Nico, and now he's in a graveyard. Nico is digging a hole. The ghost from before is still with him and is telling Nico this is pointless as Nico already has him. Nico insists that he wants a second opinion. Once the hole is deep enough, Nico throws in some fast food and tries to summon the dead. Nico summons Theus, who once navigated the maze. Nico asks how he can bring his sister back, and Theseus says to give up now as it will only drive you mad. Nico's ghost tells Nico to ask him about the one-to-one exchange. Theseus recognizes the voice and seems spooked, but ultimately tells Nico that it is true. You can sacrifice a soul for a soul. Theseus then begs Nico to release him as someone can sense the power in his coming. Then purple spirit starts spilling out of Percy's fountain, and in fear, Percy slashes the fountain in two. Tyson finds him the next morning, still in shock. Afterwards, everyone meets up outside the entrance of the labyrinth. Percy speaks with Chiron about his dream last night of Luke. Chiron reveals to Percy that Kronos may be seeking Daedalus for another reason than to just find a way to navigate the maze. Chiron believes that Kronos wants Daedalus to build him a new body. Percy then tells Chiron that they have a spy at camp that revealed to Luke that they're going on a quest. Percy tells Chiron that he thinks it may be Quintus as he doesn't trust him. Chiron tells Percy that he will keep an eye on things, and then Percy, Anabeth, Grover, and Tyson set off into the labyrinth. They get about 100 feet before they are hopelessly lost, and Grover starts hyperventilating, so not a great start. The walls disappear and the floor changes from wood to brick to stone, and they have absolutely no idea where they are. Grover smells monsters and they find a dead skeleton. Anabeth says they need to go deeper. They make it to a mosaic room with a picture of the gods, but they aren't alone. There's a man with two faces, and they encourage Anabeth to choose. Behind the man is two doorways, and each side wants Anabeth to choose their pathway. One pathway leads to where they want to go, and one leads to certain death. Anabeth reveals who this is: Janus, god of doorway, choices, and beginnings. And Janus is toying with Annabeth's emotions. Before Anabeth can choose, a lady bathed in light appears and tells Janus to leave as it's not Annabeth's time yet. Janus, under threat from the lady, ultimately decides to leave. The woman invites our heroes to sit with her and they have lunch. When Percy asks who she is, she reveals herself to be the wife of Zeus, goddess of marriage, Hera. Hera reveals that she's come to see Anabeth, and Anabeth is super confused by this as Hera typically hates demigods. Hera denies this, even though Anabeth brings up the fact that she tried to kill Hercules a whole bunch. Hera reveals that the minor gods such as Janus feel really slighted by Olympus and could be easily persuaded to join Kronos' army. Percy then deduces that this must be who Mr. D was sent out to check on to make sure they don't join Kronos' army. Hera tells them that they should visit her son Hephaestus, as he is a big fan of Daedalus and probably knows his whereabouts. And then Hera also offers Anabeth a wish. Anabeth wishes for a way to navigate the maze. Hera agrees and says they already have a way to navigate the maze, and Percy knows what it is. Hera warns Anabeth that she only delayed Janus, and soon Anabeth will have to make a choice. Then Hera leaves. Anabeth asks Percy what Hera was talking about, but Percy says he has absolutely no idea, so they decide to just continue on. And Tyson says they should go to the left, as something really big is coming from the right. They sprint down the corridor but come to a dead end. There is a giant boulder blocking their path. Tyson moves the boulder and they hide behind it, but they soon realize they've trapped themselves in a cell. Anabeth concludes that they've ended up in Alcatraz in San Francisco. Tyson sees something and takes off, slipping through a crack. Grover pleads for him to stop because on the other side of the bars is a woman with the body of a dragon, bat wings, and hundreds of snakes crawling along her body. They listen in on what she's saying and realize she's toying with a prisoner. Tyson reveals that this is Campe, a Cyclops' worst nightmare. During the Titans' reign, Campe imprisoned Cyclops and the 100-handed ones, the elder brothers of the Cyclops. The person Campe is torturing Biaris, a 100-handed one that also happens to be Tyson's hero. When Campe leaves, they go to check on Biaris, who is crying. Tyson pleads with the 100-handed one to get up and fight, break out of his cell, but Biaris is too terrified of Campe to do anything. Tyson refuses to believe this, as he's heard of all of Biaris' feats. As Tyson tries to talk Biaris and get him to snap out of his fear, Grover gets really worried as he can sense that Campe is coming back. So Tyson finally relents and breaks the bars on the cell for Biaris. But Biaris won't come with them, so Percy, with quick thinking, challenges Biaris to a game of rock, paper, scissors. If Percy wins, Biaris comes with them. Biaris agrees as he's never lost a game of rock, paper, scissors. Percy wins by playing finger gun, which beats everything. Biaris says that Percy cheated, but ultimately goes with them. When they step out of the cell, they realize that Campe is right there blocking their path. So they run the other way, and Campe starts chasing them with her poison scimitars. They race all throughout Alcatraz with explosions and terrified tourists. In the midst of everything, Anabeth notices that the dark storm around San Francisco has gotten even worse from the last time she was there. Tyson tries to encourage Biaris to fight, but he refuses, so Tyson decides to cause a distraction while the others escape back to the labyrinth. Percy wants to stay to help, but Tyson tells him to go ahead as the poison from Campe's swords will hurt Cyclops but not kill them. Anabeth finds an entrance, but Tyson isn't going to make it as Campe is gaining on him. Percy activates the shield that Tyson gave him 2 summers ago and throws it at Campe, stunning her enough for Tyson to make it into the labyrinth. Once he's in, the door seals shut, and for the first time, Percy's glad to be back in the death maze. They keep running until they find a room with waterfalls. Anabeth and Tyson try to convince Biaris to come back to camp to help them fight, but Biaris refuses. Tyson asks what about his brothers, and Biaris says there's no more 100-handed ones left. They've all faded. Percy asks how an immortal monster can fade, but Anabeth says even immortality has its limits. If no one remembers you, you lose the will to live. This is why honoring the gods is so important. Percy says maybe it's not the mortals that forgot them, but maybe they faded because they gave up on themselves. Biaris, with shame on his face, turns and leaves. Tyson is distraught that his hero turned out to be like this, and Anabeth changes the subject by saying they should find a place to camp for the night. They find a place and Anabeth takes first watch. Percy can't sleep, so Anabeth and him start talking. Anabeth admits that she has absolutely no idea what she's doing, but Percy says that's typically how their quests go and they'll figure it out. This makes Anabeth smile, and Percy once again asks about the last line of the prophecy, but Anabeth says not here in the dark. Percy isn't happy about it, but concedes and then falls asleep. He once again dreams that he's back in Daedalus's prison. Daedalus and his son, revealed to be Icarus, are now older. Daedalus is working on something and declares it done. When he holds it up, it's 2 pairs of mechanic wings. Daedalus and Icarus begin putting them on, and Daedalus warns Icarus not to fly too high or too low, as the sun and the sea would melt the wax holding the wings together. As they are putting on the wings, they hear a banging on the door, so they work faster. But soon the king, who has kept them imprisoned all these years, enters. He's revealed to be King Minos. Icarus throws hot wax at Minos, and Icarus and Daedalus are able to take off, finally free. Icarus, finally being free, becomes excited and flies too high. His wings start to melt, and he plummets to the ground. Percy wakes up the next morning and everyone gets ready to continue exploring the labyrinth. They approach a tunnel and Grover says it smells like the underworld. Percy then notices a wrapper from a fast food chain on the ground, the same that Nico used to summon the dead. Percy, thinking Nico is near, takes off down the corridor to find him, and everyone follows him and they find an exit. When they exit, they realize they're on a ranch with red cows, the sacred cattle of Apollo. They soon meet a worker of the ranch, Eurytheon, a fellow demigod. He says they're not the first demigods to come from the exit. Percy figures this means Nico is here. Percy asks to see him, but Eurytheon warns them to leave now. But Percy insists they need to see Nico, so Eurytheon takes them to see his boss. They are taken to the boss, who greets them and welcomes them to the Triple G Ranch. Percy immediately notices that he has 3 torsos. He is introduced as Mr. Grayon. Before anyone can say anything, Nico steps outside. When he sees Percy, he draws his sword, but Grayon tells Nico to put it away and he won't have his guests killing each other. Nico says that they killed his sister and now they've come to kill him. Percy says that's absolutely not true, and what happened to Bianca was an accident. Nico finally puts his sword away and tells Percy to stay away from him. Grayon gives them a tour of the ranch, from the fire-breathing horses to the sacred cows. Grayon raises exotic animals in case if a war ever breaks out, and he says he raises the sacred cows for meat. This immediately makes Grover upset, as they're the sacred cattle of Apollo. But Grayon says if Apollo cared, he'd be there, and Grover insists that if Apollo knew, he would be. Percy recognizes the name of the ranch. It was the one on the crates that Quintus had, but Grayon says he's never heard of Quintus, even though Grayon describes him to a T. Grayon then takes everyone to see his prized flesh-eating horses, and everyone is absolutely disgusted because the stable is covered in poop. Eurytheon says Grayon is too cheap to pay for anyone to clean it, and Grover is once again outraged. Anabeth deduces that he's raising these animals for Kronos' army and calls Grayon a monster. Nico then says this is a waste of time as he came here for information. Nico said Grayon could lead Nico to the soul he needs. This confuses Percy, as Percy thought Nico wanted his soul. Nico says that's ridiculous, as Bianca's soul is worth 1,000 of Percy's souls. It's then revealed that the ghost Nico has been listening to is the evil king Minos. Percy is shocked to hear this, but Nico says to mind his own business. Nico turns to Grayon, but Grayon then says the deal has become complicated, as Luke is now offering Grayon money in exchange for powerful demigods, and Nico is about as powerful as they come. Grayon then goes to capture all of them, but Percy proposes a deal. If Percy can clean the stables, Grayon has to let them free. Grayon agrees, but says Percy has to get it done by sunset. Grayon then takes everyone back to the ranch as hostages and leaves Percy to the filthy flesh-eating horses. Percy heads down to the river, planning to use the water to clean the stables, but once he gets there, the Naiad stops him, saying that all that horse manure would completely ruin the ecosystem of the river. Percy agrees and says that's not fair to the Naiads or the animals of the river, but he still needs a way to clean the stables. The Naiads tell him to dig in the dirt, and he does, and what he finds is seashells. He says how could this help him, but the Naiads say that the power is always inside Percy. Percy then heads back to the stables with the seashells and feels a pulling in his gut. So he wills the seashells to life, and all of a sudden giant geysers of water sprout from the shells, completely dousing the stables. The stables are soon clean, but Percy can't stop the water. So it takes all of his concentration and all of his might to stop the water. Eventually, though, he is able to get it stopped, and Percy, very tired but happy, heads back to the ranch. Percy tells Grayon that the stables are clean and tells him to release his friends who are now tied up. Grayon decides not to, as he won't get paid, and since Percy didn't make the promise on the river Styx, Grayon doesn't have to hold up to his end of the deal. Percy, angry at this, takes out Riptide. Percy and Grayon fight, and Percy manages to stab him in the chest, but Grayon is still standing and reveals that he has 3 hearts. Percy realizes that all hearts need to be stabbed at the same time. So Percy gets a crazy idea. He drops his sword and grabs a bow off the wall. Percy isn't good at archery, but he prays to Apollo and Artemis for one good shot. And with a diving leap, Percy shoots an arrow through the side of Grayon's chest, piercing all 3 hearts at once. Percy frees his friends and confronts Nico. Percy tries to get Nico to stop his quest to rescue Bianca and stop listening to the Ghost King Minos, as it's not what Bianca would have wanted. Nico refuses and says Percy couldn't know what Bianca would have wanted. Percy tells Nico to summon her and ask. Nico says he's tried, but she won't come. But Percy is pretty sure this time she will. And Percy finally figures out that it's been Bianca sending Percy iris messages of Nico. Nico tries, but Minos shows up and tells Nico to not trust these people. And Percy argues with Minos to leave Nico alone. It's also revealed at this time that Minos was actually the one to drive Chris Rodriguez crazy in the maze. Nico is tired of arguing with him, so he tells Minos to leave, and for the time being, he does. Finally, Bianca appears and tells Nico that he needs to forgive Percy, as holding grudges is a deadly, fatal flaw of children of Hades. Besides, it's not really Percy Nico is mad at, it's Bianca, as she left Nico. Bianca tells Nico to please stop trying to revive her, as it's not what she wants. Bianca also tells Nico to stop summoning the dead, as it draws the attention of Kronos. And then Bianca takes her leave and tells Nico that she loves him. Our heroes decide to stay the night at the ranch, as our heroes don't really want to travel at night after what they just witnessed. That night, Percy dreams of Luke again, who is closing in on his plans to attack Camp Half-Blood, and he's planning to have Campe lead the attack, as she wants revenge on our heroes for escaping. Percy once again also dreams of Daedalus, who is now with his nephew Perdix, who looks at Daedalus like a superhero, but Daedalus, since his son's death, has become bitter. Perdix, who is also an inventor, tries to impress his uncle, but Daedalus just feels as if Perdix is trying to replace him. And when Perdix brings up Icarus, Daedalus has heard enough. He tosses Perdix a beetle, but when he goes to catch it, the beetle was tossed too far, and Perdix falls off a cliff. Athena, Daedalus' mom, then comes down and punishes Daedalus, saying that he'll pay for that. Daedalus then collapses in pain and Percy wakes up. When Percy wakes up, it's 2 a.m. and Grover is also awake watching the Nature Channel. Grover tells Percy that 7 days have passed since they left camp, as time moves faster in the labyrinth. So now Grover is officially out of time to find Pan. When they go back, Grover will lose his searcher's license. Percy tells Grover that they will figure something out, but Grover says it's hopeless. He's not brave like Percy. Percy tries to cheer Grover up, but Grover is just too depressed. The next morning, our heroes get ready to go back into the maze, minus Nico, who has decided to stay behind. Anabeth is worried about him, but Percy has a feeling that Nico's gonna be okay now. Before they go, Eurytheon thanks them for liberating his ranch from Grayon and gives them a present from Hephaestus, a mechanical spider that will lead them to Hephaestus' workshop. Anabeth is not pleased by this due to her fear of spiders, but relents as it's the only lead they have. Once in the maze, they activate it and it takes off at lightning speed. They do their best to keep up and manage to until they come to a room blocked by a sphinx. The sphinx tells them they must answer 20 riddles in order to pass, or it will eat them. Anabeth, being the brainiac that she is, steps up to answer the riddles. But instead of riddles, the sphinx asks a bunch of questions, such as the square root of 16. Anabeth, of course, knows all the answers to the questions, but becomes agitated as these aren't riddles. Anabeth then yells at the Sphinx, telling the Sphinx that it's insulting her intelligence, and she refuses to answer any more questions. The Sphinx then becomes angry and attacks them. Thankfully, though, they're able to fight it off, and Grover, using his reed pipes, grows some vines to trap it. Afterwards, thankfully, they are able to pick up the sounds of the spider down the tunnel, and they take off after it. Finally, they find the workshop of Hephaestus. They meet the god, and Percy notices that he looks much uglier than on Olympus. They ask Hephaestus where Daedalus is, and Hephaestus tells them it's a waste of time as Daedalus won't help them. Anabeth argues with him, and finally Hephaestus decides to help, but first our heroes must do something for him. Hephaestus asks them to go investigate his forge under Mount St. Helen, as he suspects someone is using it. This is dangerous as the Titan Typhon is trapped there, and Hephaestus worries that whoever is using his forge is trying to set the Titan free. Hephaestus tells them the mechanical spider will take them where they need to go. So our heroes once again follow the spider. Things are going well until Grover suddenly stops. Anabeth tells him to hurry as they're losing the spider's trail, but Grover says he can smell the presence of Pan coming from the tunnel to his left. Anabeth says that they can come back after they've checked out Hephaestus' forges, but Grover says that this part of the labyrinth may be gone by then. Grover decides to leave the group, and Tyson volunteers to go with him. Anabeth does not like this idea, but Percy knows this is what Grover needs to do. Percy tells Anabeth that they will find them again, and then our heroes split up. Percy and Anabeth soon arrive at the forges of Mount St. Helen. They decide to split up in the mines as Anabeth can turn invisible and check it out. But while Percy is waiting, he hears someone approaching, so he hides in a mine cart. The cart is then pushed into a room and Percy discovers who is using Hephaestus' forges. Monsters known as telekines, half dog, half seal creatures. And the telekines just so happen to hate Zeus for banishing them to Tartarus, so they're working for Kronos. Soon the telekines spot Percy and Percy takes off to find Anabeth. He finds Anabeth and Anabeth says the telekines are working on creating a weapon for Kronos. Percy tells Anabeth to put back on her hat and escape and let Hephaestus know what's going on. Anabeth refuses to leave Percy behind, but Percy tells her that he has a plan. Anabeth reluctantly agrees, but before she goes, she kisses Percy and tells him not to die. Percy sits there stunned for a little while, but eventually snaps out of it when the telekines catch up with him. Percy taps into the power he felt when he urged the seashells to life and causes a giant geyser to erupt. Water and lava meet and the volcano explodes, sending Percy sky high. Percy drifts in and out of consciousness and eventually has a dull memory of crash landing on an island. Percy wakes up on said island to a girl tending to his wounds. The girl tells Percy to rest and he passes out again. Percy wakes up again in a cave and he notices as far as caves go, this one is pretty nice. In fact, the whole island is a paradise. He finds the girl and she introduces herself as Calypso and tells Percy that he is on Ogygia, a phantom island that isn't near anything and has its own time. Percy is eager to get back to his friends, but Calypso tells him he's in no condition and to rest first. Percy realizes she's right and collapses on the spot. He wakes up a little bit later and finds Calypso planting some flowers. Percy also notices at this point just how gorgeous Calypso is. Percy gets caught staring, and embarrassed, he goes to help her plant the flowers. The plant is known as moonlace, a special flower that can only be planted at night. Percy tells her that her garden is amazing and he doesn't have anything like it back in Manhattan. Calypso asks what Manhattan is and Percy discovers that Calypso has been trapped on this island for a long time as punishment for supporting her father Atlas and the Titans during the First War. Percy and Calypso start to spend some time together, but Calypso keeps pulling away from Percy. Percy finally asks her why, and she reveals that the gods do this to punish her. They send young men to her island that she can't help but fall in love with, and eventually they all leave her. But before they can discuss this further, they get a visitor, Hephaestus. Hephaestus tells Percy that Anabeth made it back to his workshop safely, but she's absolutely worried about Percy, and everyone else thinks Percy's dead. Hephaestus also tells Percy that his explosion in Mount St. Helen caused Typhon to stir and wake. Hephaestus finally tells Percy how to navigate the maze and find Daedalus. He tells Percy that Theseus didn't use a magical string. He just had a mortal that could see through the mist. And that's when it all clicks for Percy. Hephaestus then takes his leave and Percy sits on the beach thinking. Calypso tells Percy that he can stay on the island and become immortal and escape his prophecy. Percy tells Calypso he's sorry but he can't leave his friends. Percy mentions maybe he can come back and visit, but Calypso says no man has ever found this island twice. Calypso takes Percy to a raft and tells him it will take him wherever he wants to go. Percy says how sorry he is, but Calypso says just to remember her. She then gives him a moonlace flower and asks him to plant it for her in Manhattan. With that, Percy asks the raft to take him to Camp Half-Blood and Percy sails away. Percy arrives at Camp Half-Blood to his own funeral. He interrupts Anabeth as she's giving a speech about him, and Anabeth crushes him in a hug and the whole camp goes crazy. Chiron says they should talk somewhere more privately and reveals that Percy has been gone for 2 whole weeks. Percy explains the whole story to them, but leaves out Calypso as he can't bring himself to tell them about her. He also tells them about Hephaestus' revelation that they need a mortal who can see through the mist to navigate the labyrinth, and Percy wants to use Rachel Elizabeth Dare. Anabeth is very against this idea and storms off. Percy is confused and Chiron reveals that she's jealous and very territorial of her friends. And Anabeth probably realizes where Percy actually was marooned for 2 weeks. Chiron also reveals that Grover and Tyson have been missing since the 4 of them split up. And on top of that, Chiron also says that Quintus has disappeared. Percy believes that he's the spy at camp that Luke has been using, but here's the weird thing, Quintus left behind Mrs. O'Leary. So Percy goes to visit her and she's absolutely thrilled to see Percy. That night, Percy dreams once again of King Minos and Daedalus. Minos has offered a reward to whoever can solve his riddle. Minos has traveled to a kingdom that claims to have solved it. The king of the kingdom has solved it, but he says he did so with help. Minos knows there's only one man who could solve the riddle, Daedalus. Minos has been looking for Daedalus ever since he escaped him. Minos says to hand over Daedalus or he will kill the king of the kingdom. The king refuses and Minos has his guards take him away. Before Minos can leave, the king's daughter offers Minos a bath. The daughters reveal that Daedalus knew this was a trap. They then drop some metal beads into the bathtub and they grow and start to bind Minos. He says to them that Daedalus can't escape him and even in death he will still haunt them. He's then turned into a mummy and dies. Daedalus then appears and thanks the king's daughters. She says that he now must flee as her father won't approve of this. Daedalus decides to go somewhere he thought he'd never go again, back into his labyrinth, where he plans to come up with a way to escape death so he'll never have to answer for his sins. Percy that night also dreams of Luke once again. Luke is traveling through the maze. A scouting report tells Luke that a lone half-blood is traveling the maze. Luke sets off to look for this half-blood and then Percy wakes up. The next morning, Percy and Anabeth set off for Manhattan, and on the way there, Anabeth tells Percy that last night she got a message from the Triple G Ranch. Nico disappeared back into the labyrinth. Percy then tells Anabeth about his dream of Luke and how there's a lone half-blood traveling the maze, and they both decide that this is very bad. They first stop at Percy's mom's apartment to catch her up on everything that has happened and to show her that Percy is in fact not dead. Percy apologizes for the whole school fiasco at orientation and tells his mom that she can tell Paul the truth after the quest is over. Percy then calls Rachel and they meet in Times Square where she's painted as a statue. They find out that she's raising money for art programs in elementary school. The next person posing as a statue comes to take her place and Percy, Rachel, and Anabeth go off to talk. And it is very clear that Anabeth and Rachel do not like each other. Percy stops them from bickering and tells Rachel that they need her help. Percy explains their quest and how dangerous it can be, but Rachel agrees anyway. Anabeth then explains that they need to find an entrance to the labyrinth and explains what it would look like. Rachel says that what Anabeth is describing is at the Marriott Hotel, so with that they set off for the labyrinth. They head into the maze and Anabeth thinks they should take one way and Rachel immediately disagrees. Rachel can see a faint glowing on the floor, so they follow it like a map or like a real-life GPS. Anabeth is skeptical about this, but Percy trusts Rachel, so they follow her. Anabeth questions Rachel, so they start bickering again. Because of this, they don't hear the Impusai approaching them from behind. It's Kelly. She captures them and then takes them to Luke. Luke is in a giant arena with monsters and half-bloods battling each other to the death. The arena belongs to the giant Theus, son of Poseidon and Gaia, the earth goddess. I wonder if this Gaia person will become important. In order for Luke to get to the other side of the arena, which leads to the pathway that Luke needs to access, Luke needs to entertain Theus. So Luke has a plan. So Luke's plan was to bring him Percy. Percy must fight in the arena to entertain the giant. Percy manages to handle the first round quickly, much to Theus's disappointment. And for the next round, Percy has to face a half-blood named Ethan Nakamura. Ethan is trying to gain favor with Luke so he can join the army. Percy beats Ethan in a fight but refuses to kill him, which makes Antoine really angry. So Percy challenges Antoine to a fight. If Percy wins, they all go free, and if Antoine wins, they all die. And this time, Percy makes the bet on the river sticks. Percy manages to wound him, but soon realizes it doesn't matter. The earth keeps healing Antoine, a benefit of being born to the earth goddess. Percy comes up with a plan and traps the giant in the air, dangling from chains. Here, Percy is finally able to kill him. Percy demands that Luke let them go, but Luke says he made no such promise. That promise died with Antoine. Percy, desperate to save his friends, thinks he's all out of option, until he feels the ice whistle in his pocket from Quintus. Having no other option, he blows it, and then Mrs. O'Leary comes to the rescue. With Mrs. O'Leary backing them up, they're able to escape. In their escape, they run into the half-blood Ethan, and Anabeth recognizes him from camp. Percy then realizes that Ethan was the half-blood wandering the maze, not Nico. Percy tries to convince him to join their side, but Ethan Nakamura says that the gods don't care about them, and then he leaves. Anabeth gives Rachel a hard time again, and they decide to camp for the night. Percy apologizes to Rachel and says Anabeth isn't usually like this, but Rachel says it's obvious why she's acting like this and calls Percy clueless. Rachel tells Percy a bit about herself and how she likes to paint and read and doesn't have the best family life. Percy then falls asleep and dreams of Kronos. Kronos is telling Percy that he assured his revival. Then Kronos shows Percy a vision of Grover and Tyson, and they're in trouble. Percy wakes up and wants to tell Anabeth that their friends are in trouble, but before he can, an earthquake shakes the maze. So with Rachel leading them, they set off for safety, and eventually they find Daedalus's workshop. But inside, instead of finding Daedalus, they find Quintus. Anabeth accuses him of being a traitor and working for Luke and asks what he's done with Daedalus. Quintus states that he only works for himself, but the bigger reveal here is Quintus is Daedalus. Percy at first doesn't believe him, as Quintus looks nothing like the Daedalus that he's been dreaming of, but then he puts everything together. Quintus has been passing his essence from automaton body to automaton body. It's how he's been surviving all these years. And Quintus means 5, meaning this is his 5th body. Daedalus reveals that he's been doing this to escape death, to hide from Minos, who still haunts him. Anabeth says this is unnatural, but Quintus assures her that he is very much Daedalus, and their mother, Athena, never lets him forget it. That's when we get to see the tattoo on his neck. It's a dark bird, a branding mark of a murderer, for what he did to Peridix. When Peridix died, Athena turns him into a partridge, the bird on Daedalus's neck. Percy asks why he came to camp, and Daedalus says he wanted to see if the camp was worth saving. Get his own side of the story as opposed to what Luke told him. Anabeth pleads with him not to let Luke through the maze, but Daedalus says he's no longer in control of the maze. It's tied to his life force, yes, but the maze does whatever it wants. Percy asks why Mrs. O'Leary helped them, and Daedalus says he knows Percy has a good heart. And Daedalus felt bad about their quest basically being in vain. When Anabeth asks what he means, Daedalus tells them that they're too late. Luke got there first and obtained the string to navigate the labyrinth. In exchange for helping them, Kronos will make Daedalus the new Hades, so he can reclaim his son and cast Minos into Tartarus, and then he can finally stop running from death. Anabeth calls Daedalus a coward and says that Daedalus has no right to call himself a son of Athena, and she was wrong to have ever looked up to him. Daedalus hangs his head in shame and just tells them that they better warn the camp of the attack, but before they can, they are interrupted by Kelly, Minos, and a captured Nico coming into the workshop. Daedalus asks what's the meaning of this, and Kelly says that Minos turned over Nico, but in exchange he wants Daedalus's head. Daedalus says this was not part of the deal, but now that Kronos has what he wants from Daedalus, he betrayed him. Nico apologizes to Percy and says Minos tricked him into coming back into the maze, saying that Percy was in danger. Percy is shocked that Nico was actually trying to protect him. Kelly's army goes to attack, but Mrs. O'Leary comes to the defense. and a battle breaks out. While everyone is distracted, Rachel notices wings in the corner, the same wings that Daedalus and his son Icarus once used to escape. While everyone is distracted, they start putting on the wings. Nico uses all of his power to banish Minos to the underworld, but unfortunately Kelly has gotten her fangs in Percy's neck. But Anabeth comes to the rescue and kills the Impusi. The four of them go to the window to escape and urge Daedalus to come with them, but he's still fighting the army and refuses to leave Mrs. O'Leary behind, so he tells them to just go. And reluctantly, our heroes take to the skies with their new wings. Our heroes land quickly, not wanting to test how long the wings will work, and when they land, they notice the window to Daedalus' workshop is gone. Percy wonders how they're going to get back to the maze, and Anabeth wonders if the labyrinth is even still there as it was tied to Daedalus' life force, but Nico assures them that Daedalus is still alive as he can sense it. They decide they need to find a ride to the nearest town. Rachel says she'll take care of it, and in the meantime, Anabeth goes off to send an iris message to camp to warn Chiron about the impending attack. Rachel comes back and says she found a limo. The rest are confused, but everyone gets in. Rachel asks the driver to take them to town, and the driver replies, "Whatever you want, Miss Dare." On the way to town, Rachel spots something off the highway and asks the driver to pull over. He then leaves them at an old mine shaft. Here they find an entrance to the labyrinth and are once again able to enter. Anabeth and Rachel surprisingly have a normal conversation as they walk. Anabeth tries to pry into Rachel's background, but Rachel becomes evasive. Percy and Nico also talk, and Percy tries to convince Nico to come back to camp. But before Nico can reply, they stop at a corridor, and Rachel says she senses something very evil down there. Everyone realizes it's the entrance to Mount Orpheus, the Titan's palace. So Percy decides he needs to check it out. So Anabeth gives him her cap of invisibility and tells him to be careful. Once there, Percy sees some old faces, the Telekines and Ethan Nakamura. The Telekines give Ethan a gift to bring to Kronos, a completed weapon, a black scythe. Percy then sneaks away and finds the golden sarcophagus of Kronos, hoping to destroy the Titan before he can rise. Percy pushes off the lid, but what he sees shocks him. Instead of a Titan, he sees Luke, and he's just lying there. Then Ethan and the Telekines come into the room. The Telekines tell Ethan to pledge himself to Lord Kronos, and Kronos will rise. Percy takes off his invisibility cap and pleads with Ethan not to, but Ethan swears his loyalty and the ground rumbles, and Luke's body rises out of the sarcophagus. And instead of Luke's blue eyes, they're golden. Kronos has revived in Luke's body. Percy flees, but Kronos gives chase. When Percy gets back to the labyrinth, he runs into Rachel. Rachel, sensing the danger, throws a hairbrush at Kronos and hits him right in the eye, stunning him long enough for Nico to summon a pillar, blocking the corridor. The four then take off running. Once they're a good distance away, Anabeth asks Percy, super confused, why did Luke look like that? And Percy explains what happened. But Anabeth just has a really hard time believing it, saying Luke must still be buried in there somewhere deep. Anabeth and Percy argue and Rachel breaks them up, which causes more tension among the group. Percy decides it's best for everyone if they just head back to New York, but before they can start heading back, Percy sees something on the ground: Grover's hat. They follow a new corridor, determined to find their friends. And at the end, they find an underground river, and next to it is Tyson, holding an unconscious Grover. They run to Tyson and ask what happened. Tyson says that as soon as they approached the river, Grover said they're close and passed out, just like the last time he sensed the presence of Pan. They shake Grover awake, and Grover points to a door and says this must be it. Together, they all go inside. They walk into a beautiful paradise filled with animals and plants, and on a bed of leaves lays an old satyr. Grover approaches and kneels with an exclamation of Lord Pan. Pan tells Grover that he's been waiting for him. Grover begs Pan to come back and help save the wild, but all Pan says is, I chose well. This confuses Grover. Pan explains that he's been asleep for many years, and each time he wakes up, it gets shorter and shorter, and finally, his time has come to an end. Grover refuses to believe this, as Pan can't die, but Pan assures Grover that gods can fade. Pan asks Grover to tell all of his passing so the satyrs can finally stop looking for him and save the wild. As he cannot, only they themselves can save the wild now. Pan gives everyone some parting advice, even Rachel, saying something about her father and forgiveness. Pan asks Grover to carry his blessing, and Grover finally agrees, and Pan passes on. With that, Grover turns to leave, determined to carry the blessing and teachings of Pan with him. Rachel then leads everyone out of the labyrinth, and they end up back in Times Square. Percy whistles loudly 5 times, and 5 Pegasi drop from the sky. Percy then thanks Rachel for all her help and asks what Pan meant about her father. Rachel reveals that her father is a famous business tycoon, and she's actually rich, but doesn't agree with what her father does, since he destroys nature to build complexes. Percy tells Rachel that she's awesome and not to judge herself based on what her dad does. He certainly doesn't. Rachel tells Percy that if he ever wants to hang with a mortal again, to give her a call. And then she wishes him luck saving the world. And then our heroes, minus Rachel, race for Camp Half-Blood. Nico goes with them. He agrees to help in the battle, but not to stay at Camp Half-Blood. They get back to camp thankfully before the battle, and Percy explains everything that happened to Chiron, and Grover tells the council of Pan's passing and how he left them with his blessing, but the council full out refuses to believe Grover. They want to exile Grover, but before they can, Chiron says that this can be handled later as his camp is about to be under attack. Everyone then makes preparations for the battle. Percy worries that Kronos, now with a body, will lead the attack, but Chiron doesn't think so, as he is limited in what a mortal body can do, and he thinks that for the time being, Kronos will just send an army. Then Kronos' army breaks through from the passage of the labyrinth, and all hell breaks loose. The battle commences with Nico summoning an army and a monster coming from every direction. A fire breaks out and the forest is set ablaze. Percy rushes to save the dryads and put the fire out with the river water. Percy thinks they may actually have a shot, but then Compy breaks through the labyrinth entrance. Percy and Anabeth leap into battle together, but things are not going well. They both think this may be it. And then Grover does something incredible. He opens his mouth and lets forth a powerful, horrible screech. It stuns all the monsters, and then they race back, fleeing into the labyrinth. With this break in the battle, everyone tends to the wounded, including a steaming Nico. He pushed his powers just a tad bit too far. Then they're greeted by some unexpected visitors. Daedalus, Mrs. O'Leary, and B. Aris, who decided to help them fight in the battle. Daedalus says the only way to stop the army from coming back is to destroy the labyrinth, and the only way to do that is for him to die. And then Daedalus tells Anabeth that she was right. He was a coward. Children of Athena should be wise, and he was not. He gives Anabeth a laptop with all his unfinished projects and tells her she will be a greater architect than he ever was. Percy tells Daedalus that he won't get a fair trial in the underworld, as Minos still sits on the Council of the Undead, but Daedalus is okay with this. He's ready to face his demons head on. Daedalus offers his soul to Nico for ransom in exchange for his sisters, but Nico says no, Bianca is dead and shouldn't be brought back. Finally, he asks Percy to watch Mrs. O'Leary for him, and with that, Nico releases Daedalus' soul, and the labyrinth collapses. Everyone continues tending to the wounded and destroyed camp, and the next day they continue tending to the wounded and holding burials for those who lost their life in the battle. They may have won the battle, but they lost plenty. The Council of Cloven Elders also holds a meeting wanting to exile Grover, but Chiron tells them that during the battle, Grover's scream was called Panic, a power of Pan. A power that Grover could only have if what he said about the gods passing was true. The council still refuses to believe Grover, until Dionysus shows up and defends Grover. Dionysus votes in favor of Grover, and the council has to accept that they can't exile Grover, but they still refuse to believe him. Grover says he isn't worried about it though, as he doesn't need their help to now start protecting the wild. Dionysus also reveals that several minor gods are now in support of Kronos. Tyson bids his goodbye to Biaris, who is heading down to Poseidon's forges to start making weapons for the gods and the upcoming war. Nico comes to Percy to say his goodbyes, and Percy tries to get him to stay, but Nico says he needs to figure things out. like who his mother was and who took him and Bianca out of the Lotus Hotel and Casino. Percy gives Nico the Hades mythomagic statue that Bianca wanted him to have last year and tells Nico it's okay to still be a kid from time to time. He tells Nico to keep in touch and then Nico leaves. Dionysus surprisingly comes over to thank Percy for all his help in defending the camp. He also reveals to Percy that he cured Chris Rodriguez. When Percy looks over to the fire, Chris Rodriguez and Clarice are sitting there talking, looking awfully comfy. The rest of the summer happens normally, which Percy says feels weird. When summer comes to an end, Percy says his goodbyes to Anabeth and makes her promise to stay in touch at her fancy new private school. Before Percy leaves, he asks Anabeth what the final line of the prophecy was, and she finally tells him, "And lose a love to worse than death." Percy asks if it means Luke, and Anabeth reveals that she doesn't know. Then they get a visit from Hera. Hera tells Anabeth that her quest was a success, but Anabeth doesn't think so. Percy realizes that Hera only cares about the image of a perfect family, and the quest in that regard worked out for her. Anabeth tells Hera next time to just not help. Hera tells Anabeth that she'll regret that and then disappears. Percy wants to say more to Anabeth, but she just says, "See you later, seaweed brain," and leaves. And Percy heads home. 2 days later, Percy is celebrating his birthday with Tyson, his mom, and Paul. Percy and Paul have a chat, and Paul asks for Percy's permission to marry his mom. And Percy is just finally happy to see his mom happy, so of course he's in full agreement. And then they get an unexpected visitation from Poseidon. Poseidon and Percy then have a private chat. Poseidon and Percy talk about Luke and Kronos, and Poseidon tells Percy that Poseidon has had his hands filled trying to keep the sea spirits in check. He also reveals that eventually Typhon will escape his prison under Mount St. Helen. Percy says he can help, but Poseidon says he needs to stay here, and that he's proud of him. And also, he's Poseidon's favorite son. Poseidon then gives Percy a sand dollar as a gift and says he'll know when the time is right to spend it. Then Poseidon disappears into a cloud of mist. After the party is over, Percy heads to his room and empties his pockets, where he then finds the moonlace plant that Calypso gave him, and keeping his promise, he plants it in his flower box. And then Percy gets another unexpected visitation from Nico, who tells Percy that Daedalus made out okay in the underworld. But more importantly, Nico may have found a way for Percy to defeat Luke and Kronos. And that, Half-Bloods, is where the 4th installment of Percy's story ends. Up next, the last Olympian. What's been your favorite part in Percy's story so far? Let me know down in the comments below. But for right now, I'll be signing off, Half-Bloods, and please always remember to stay safe.